Чи не буде?
Починаємо. Відмашку мені дасте, так добре.
It's May 24, Ukraine Media Center confirms starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Cheperenko, and now we will have a briefing entitled Topical Issues Facing the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Combat Operations, Emerging Technologies and Reforms. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us today are Colonel Andriy Lebedenko, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces Ukraine, Yevhen Ostrianskyi, Brigade General, Head of the Main Directorate of Defense Planning and General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel Ivan Pavlenko, Head of the Main Directorate of Electronic Security and Cybersecurity of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Colonel Roman Gorbach, Head of HR of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and Colonel Ihor Prokhorenko, Acting Deputy Head of the Main Operations Directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So, Mr. Colonel Lebedenko, first of all, I would like to ask you to set the tone of the conversation. The floor is yours. 1, 2, 1, 2. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Good afternoon, dear journalists. The Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine highly appreciates the way you covered the activities of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. We really appreciate it. Today, our meeting is aimed at communicating the topical information to you on the activities of the armed forces. We will give you details of the operational situation, the development. Also, we will cover the matters of mobilization and, so to say, innovative activities. So I suggest to pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you. So, Mr. Colonel Prokhorenko, so what is the operational situation in the front lines for the time being? Good afternoon, dear journalists. For the time being, the situation is pretty complicated. The security and defense forces continue the defense operations in the south and east of our country. We are currently in defense, but we continue inflicting fire damage on the enemy. The main focus is currently in the Kharkiv region and as well as Donetsk and Terek operational districts. On top of that, talking about Kharkiv axis, you know that starting from the 10th of May, the enemy exercises offensive operation to create a buffer zone in the Kharkiv region. For the time being, the situation is stabilized and is under control there. The enemy was stopped and suffers severe damage in the area. Our troops continue the assault operations to re-establish the lost positions. In the Kupiansk axis, the enemy is in offensive and is involved in assault operations. Their goal is the city of Kupiansk, blocking it on the western side, as well as inflicting damage on the armed forces of Ukraine. For the time being, the enemy has not succeeded on that axis. Talking about Liman and Siversk axis, in those axes, the enemy tries to breach our defense. They exercise assault operations in Liman and Slovyansk districts, suffers fire damage and heavy losses without any success in the axis. Talking about Kramatorsk axis, there are severe battles going on. The enemy is currently in assault operations in the district of the city of Chasiv Yar, where the enemy tries to breach our defense to break to the western suburbs of Chasiv Yar and establish their positions along the Donbas channel. The enemy has no success so far. In the district of Andriivka and Klishivka, to the south of Bakhmut, where we had success in offensive operations last year, we were able to reestablish our positions, but currently the enemy is trying to reconquer their lost positions without visible success. Our defense forces continue inflicting severe damage on the enemy in the district. Talking about Pokrovsky and Kurakhova districts, today those are the hot spots of the front lines. The enemy continues the assault operations both in the day and in the night time. The personnel's offensive is supported with the artillery. We have losses of some positions, but in operational terms, the enemy has no significant success there. The security and defense forces continue holding their positions in the area. Talking about the south of the country, Remki, Orikhovo, and Pridniprovsky axis. In the district of the village of Staromayorsk, the enemy continues their offensive operations, trying to reconquer their lost positions. Talking about Orikhovo and Robotino area, that's yet another axis where the enemy tries to regain the lost success, trying to push our troops to the districts from where we initiated our offensive up to 10 kilometers in the depth in year 23. In Pridniprovsky area, we continue holding the bridgehead in the east bank of Dnipro River. The enemy tries to push our troops to the Dnipro River without visible success. In Sumy region, the situation is stable and under control. In the areas along the border, the Russian Federation maintains certain group of forces that prevent Ukrainian troops from being moved to other spots in the front lines. In other areas, in Chernihiv region and rest of Sumy region, the regions bordering Russian Federation, every day the enemy inflicts artillery and aviation strikes on the positions of our troops as well as civilian infrastructure. Apart from that, the enemy doesn't leave its attempts to destroy our critical infrastructure. Every day they continue inflicting missile and aviation strikes using both manned and unmanned aerial vehicles of Shahed type. In other areas of the front lines, the situation is under control, and without drastic changes, I'm open to any and all of your questions. Thank you. We will have Q&A session in the end of our press conference. So talking about the development of the armed forces of Ukraine, Mr. Brigade General, can you please tell us about all the work going on in that area? Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Let me inform you on the main activities in the defense planning of the armed forces of Ukraine. Defense planning, if generalized, by defense planning we mean the development of the armed forces. Currently we outline the perspective and for the period until the year 2035. So let me start with the perspective organization of the armed forces of Ukraine. So despite the armed aggression of the Russian Federation, in the middle of year 2022 we started identifying the prospective organization of the armed forces of Ukraine for the period before the accession of Ukraine to NATO. Before, that work was the responsibility of both general headquarters, the commands of the branches and forces, representatives of other security and defense forces. So why the organization? Because the organization, first of all, is the balance between the necessity to respond to the threats and the capabilities of the state to maintain and develop the armed forces of Ukraine. So the organization is not only the set of military bases joined as branches and forces. In these terms, we're talking about logistics, maintenance, support, supplies, mobilization, and the organization highlights the necessity of armament, specifically in terms of perspective weapons that will be commissioned by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, which allow us to contemplate the operations of the defense industry. We are currently in consultations with our international partners on types of armament, composition, the quantity, the building of the system of management of the armed forces of Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And this work would be impossible without reformation of the system of defense management, because defense planning contains planning, programming of the capacity building, budgeting, and execution. And we become the initiator, and the Ministry of Defense supports us. And now we are in the middle of the development of system of transformation of military management. That's quite an important issue. We want to adapt it to the circumstances and principles and standards that operate in the NATO countries. All those areas that I mentioned, they are all closely interrelated. Another piece of work is the roadmap of intercompatibility. We've developed the project of the joint operation concept of the security and defense forces of the country that covers the influence of the security environment on the development on the armed forces of Ukraine, the nature of armed conflicts in future, and the concept of use of the armed forces of Ukraine. The concept is aimed at implementation of the defense strategy of Ukraine with the use of the armed forces of Ukraine. So it's the document about the war of the future and the role of the armed forces and other security and defense forces in this war. Yet another thing I need to mention is about our work on implementation on the roadmap of intercompatibility that was developed with the specialists in coordination with the specialists of NATO Secretariat. The goal of the document is to ensure the continuous defense of territorial integrity and national sovereignty of Ukraine, as well as achievement of full intercompatibility with NATO and related documents. Currently, within the framework of implementation of the strategy, we worked out the project of the primary set of interoperability requirements. This list of requirements contains both institutional requirements, which are related to Ministry of Defense and General Headquarters. Meanwhile, the functional component covers the forces itself along with other security and defense forces. Yet another area of our work is the strategy for development of branches and forces of the armed forces of Ukraine. And this spring there was a number of activities exercised by the Commander-in-Chief related to the development of different branches. The goal of this reform is reformation of the branches, identification of their roles in the system of the armed forces of Ukraine in the context of the future potential conflicts. The commander-in-chief was paying specific attention of the development of the new types of material and the vision of the commanders of the forces on their regarding their application. Also, as the war demonstrates, the weapons and the ways of their use changed dramatically, and during working out of those concepts, we try to look in the future to forecast the perspective, organization, use, training, and all other issues that I've mentioned previously. And to summarize it, I would like to inform you on the functional study of the General Staff. In February this year, there was a functional survey in the General Staff, and other management structures of the armed forces of Ukraine, the organization, and other agencies submitting to the General Staff. It was decided to optimize the organization of the General Staff and other military management bodies. By optimization, I don't mean personnel cut, but we mean rational use of resources and personnel. We want to adopt copy of functions by different agencies of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is why after the optimization, all those agencies that I've mentioned, the Office of the Commander-in-Chief, General Staff, and other agencies will be cut at least 60%. And only 25% will be cut. Meanwhile, 35% will be transferred to other branches or other security and defense forces. Thus, we will be able to improve the structure and organization of the General Staff and other management agencies, and by cutting personnel from there, we will be able to restaff the military units. That will allow us for better rotation of the military units, and those units fulfilling their tasks in the area of battle operations. We understand that in the conditions of war, those management bodies should be reinforced that exercise the direct management of the battle units. This is why we have to pay attention to the staffing of the staffs of different levels. And as you may know, according to the order of the President, there is a new force being established in the structure of the security and defense forces, the unmanned aerial vehicles forces, and currently they are being staffed. My report is done. Thank you. Thank you. So talking about the staffing of the military units, Mr. Colonel Korbach, can you please tell us to what extent the newly adopted law on mobilization will influence the staffing process? Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to remind you that mobilization was announced on the 24th of February 2022, and within these 2 years, the legislation in the country, not only in the area of mobilization, but in other areas, is being amended. And one of such cases of amendment of mobilization laws is the adopted law that amended certain other laws of Ukraine, and it took effect on the 18th of May this year. This law altered many laws of Ukraine, the law on mobilization, the law on social protection of servicemen and their family members, and other regulations. And at the same time, other laws have come into force that influence the staffing of the armed forces of Ukraine. For example, such that enabled us accepting the former prisoners that were let on parole. And if we analyze the changes to this legislation, the changes really facilitate the process of staffing of the armed forces of Ukraine. So what are the main areas that were subject to amendment in this law? So first of all, it's about the registration. More categories of Ukrainian citizens were registered by the military conscription offices. For example, previously the representatives of the State Bureau of Investigation and National Police of Ukraine were not registered. And now, within 2 months, all these categories are supposed to register with the military conscription offices. This law vests more responsibilities in the citizens themselves. You know that starting from the 18th of May, every citizen is obliged to always carry the military registration ID on them, and on demand of an authorized representative of the conscription office or national police, the citizens are obliged to produce such military registration IDs, and such activities are supposed to be documented by video documentation devices. And in case of violation either by citizens or the authorized representatives of the conscription officers or national police, the violators will be held accountable. Also, the law identifies a number of categories of citizens that have a right to postponement of mobilization. Also, we've improved the obligations of the local governments in the area of mobilization. Also, we've specified the procedure for booking, and all those amendments entail the development of the regulations to be issued by the General Staff, Ministry of Defense, and other agencies. So talking about the law on military service, it was cardinally amended For example, the draft service is cancelled by that law, and now the citizens can acquire military specialization during the basic general training and basic general service. What does it mean? The citizens under 25 years can be sent for basic military service, and the term of this service will be from 3 to 5 months. And during this military training, they acquire their military specialization. So the citizens under 24 years have the right to choose the period when they undergo this training, but starting from 24 years and on, the citizens will not be entitled to such choice. The higher educational institutions are also vested the responsibility to provide basic military training for the students who study there that will enable the citizens of Ukraine to acquire the military specialization, and under 25 years of age, the citizens who are subject to conscription, according to this law, they are entitled to postponement and cannot be drafted. Also, the law regulates the grounds for retirement of the servicemen. That was quite a sensitive issue because different categories of the servicemen had different motives for postponements. So the mobilized ones were retiring. Meanwhile, those who serve under contract cannot be retired. Now this approach was being balanced by that law. Also, the law provides certain advantages to the servicemen and the members of their families, like additional days of vacation or rest and recreation, or the exemptions in terms of lending. And I have to mention that the digitalization plays more crucial role during registration that reduces the human factor, corruption risks, both in the territorial conscription offices and military units, and soon it will enable us optimizing the amount of personnel directly working with mobilization and registration of the people subject to conscription. So those are the main areas where the changes took place. The law is pretty extensive, so I will be open to answer any and all of your questions after the briefing. Thank you very much. So talking about the technological innovations, Mr. Colonel Pavlenko, can you please tell us about the innovations, about the new technologies used during the war? Well, we see that this new war is the war of technologies now. We have the whole new class of weapons, the robotized and unmanned vehicles that change the paradigm of war right in front of our eyes. Respectively, we respond to the development of the systems that are capable of effectively counteracting the mentioned weapons. I'm talking about the electronic warfare capabilities. So every day the management systems are being developed. The systems of navigation and data transfer are improving. That allows creating such things as robots and unmanned vehicles, and every such weapon is vulnerable to certain electromagnetic spectrum measures. For example, currently the electromagnetic spectrum is very dense. There's a lot of capabilities that use different technologies, but they all work in electromagnetic spectrum. The electronic jamming capabilities influence the existing capabilities of the enemy, but at the same time there is a risk of so-called friendly fire, so influencing own capabilities or affecting own capabilities. And to solve this problem, we were working for a pretty extensive period to create the system of situational awareness that enable us to see the electromagnetic spectrum, so to say, to understand the location of the electronic countermeasures capabilities of the enemy and of the friendly units. And currently, the experts of the armed forces of Ukraine have created the system of management of the electronic countermeasures that are in fact the finalization of the identification and management cycle. What does it mean? It means that for the time being we are capable of coordinating the activities of our unmanned aerial vehicles and our electronic countermeasures capabilities. We can see the activities of the enemy in electromagnetic spectrum and to effectively counter their activities, because within the last year only the number of fixed wing unmanned aerial vehicles have grown threefold, and the number of FPV type UAVs has grown fourfold, and the trend is growing. This is why the skills of our experts in proper application of capabilities, coordinating of their activity is quite important. Then the management of the armed, or the command of the armed forces of Ukraine, pays a lot of attention to the development of electronic countermeasures capabilities. First of all, the number of the electronic countermeasures units is growing, and a lot of attention is paid to the quality. We've implemented an additional training course for non-specialists on electronic warfare and cybersecurity, so that our servicemen have at least basic knowledge about electronic countermeasures capabilities, electromagnetic spectrum, the way it functions, and so that they understand some basic matters of cyber hygiene, understanding the threats posed by all the electronic devices in the modern era. Talking about the most interesting topic, the close combat electronic countermeasures capabilities, or so-called the trench jamming capabilities. That's one of the small niches of the electronic countermeasures, because electronic countermeasures ranges from space-based systems all the way down to very small devices. Currently, we've codified more than 10 types of such capabilities, mostly manufactured by Ukrainian manufacturers. At this very moment, we're in the middle of codification of 10 more types of devices. I would call them the second generation devices, because the development in this area is ongoing. Like every 3 to 4 months there are specific changes going on. There are new frequency ranges, there are new protocols for data transfer emerging that requires quick response from manufacturers. Is quite complicated. Currently the state is not capable of covering the needs of our servicemen 100%, and we really appreciate the input of the volunteers who provide these types of capabilities to the armed forces. And we continue working, and the number and the quality of the mentioned capabilities keeps growing. I'm not only talking about jamming capabilities, but also the systems that are aimed at identification and detection of the enemy UAVs. Just as a fact, there's a lot of capabilities that used to be effective 2 years ago, but for the time being they are almost not used at all, and were replaced by the newer devices, because the system that used to be able to detect one drone and to inform a serviceman on approach of such drone, sometimes now we have more than 10 or 20 such UAVs in the air at the same moment. It requires adequate response, and this is the progress that we work on quite seriously. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, dear journalists. We have time for just a quick couple of questions, so let's do it like that. One media, one question. Please go ahead. Olena Chernikova, TV channel Ukraina, talking about the operational situation in the front lines. Specifically in Kharkiv region, the armed forces were able to repel the enemy's offensive, but would it be better if there would be a defense line built in the border. So does this situation in the front lines allow us to hold in the enemy offensive, the potential enemy offensive in the Sumy region? Thank you. Well, talking about the Kharkiv axis, as we've mentioned, the enemy is being deterred there and is suffering fire damage. The goals of the enemy to wedge the defense of our forces and to penetrate it into the depth of 20 to 30 kilometers. So those goals were not achieved by the enemy, and currently they are being deterred in the area. We're planning our activities on reestablishing the lost status, and in the Sumy area the defense is built there in quite an efficient manner. All of the shortcomings in the Kharkiv defense were taken into account, and we have all capabilities to deter the enemy should they resort to offensive operations in that area. Another question, Andriy Makarenko, Armia TB. So talking about the mobilization, we talk a lot to the active duty servicemen, and they have a question. Are they supposed to update their information in the Reserve Plus system? Well, the active duty servicemen are not supposed to update their details. Only the reservists and the people subject to conscription are supposed to update their details in the system. Another question, please.
From a Spanish newspaper, El País, there has been a report about the Russians being able...
Just a second, we'll use a translation and we'll connect our earphones.
Дякую.
So, yes, please.
There have been reports that Russians are now able to disrupt communications via Starlink. I want to know what comments do they have about this situation. Thank you.
Let me comment on this situation. Really, such threat currently exists. This is why the infrastructure that ensures the management of the radio networks is being supplemented by other communication measures, because really there will be certain impact that will affect the communications, but not in a critical way to influence the management system, including the piloting of the unmanned aerial vehicles. Thank you. Another question. Ludmila Klishuk, Armia, inform a question to the main operational department every day in the statistics of the losses of the enemy within the month of May. We see that every day our security and defense forces liquidate more than 1,000 of enemy personnel, and it's possible that May may become the bloodiest month in the context of losses of personnel. If you observe this trend, how is it achieved? Do we have better tactics, better weapons, or what? Well, the enemy suffers losses like that not only during May. We maintain the statistics, and starting from the year 24, every month the enemy loses about 27,000–30,000 personnel every month. So every day their losses amount to 700 to 1,000. The same applies to the material. They lose a lot of heavy material. And that's the result of the fact that the political management of Russian Federation, they don't pay attention to the lives of their personnel. They want to achieve their they want to achieve the success and exercise their political ambitions. Good afternoon, Victoria Kovtseva. My question is about the demobilization. It was mentioned that demobilization law will require about 8 months to develop. So what is the situation with it for the time being? The draft law on retirement and demobilization is being developed, but it's not being developed by the general staff. This is why I unfortunately cannot comment anything on this issue. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Colonel Lebedenko, another question from me, talking about the innovations the science is developing in the armed forces of Ukraine for the time being. Can you please give us more detail about this? Thank you. Well, we've touched upon the number of matters related to development of the armed forces. So talking about the innovations, it covers a lot of different spheres, but this innovation activity, you know, is deployed all across the country, including the armed forces of Ukraine. So to transform the words into actions and results, we've established specific units and the management bodies, and to compensate or to prevail in the area of technologies, to compensate the traditional weapons with unmanned aerial vehicles and ground drones, to create the conditions for the national manufacturers for the healthy competition, so that we could ensure proper staffing of the armed forces. And again, what was mentioned already is the establishment of the command of the unmanned aerial forces. They will also include the new management systems, ground drones, new countermeasures capabilities, and it will only be achieved in case we successfully find innovative projects of our Ukrainian manufacturers and the manufacturers from partnering countries who give us access to the technologies that we can test in the battle conditions. And we continue working to work on this project in mass to proceed to another level, so to say. We have diverse experience in use of machine learning, and we also start using even AI in our operations. We have time for another question. Ukraine Forum, Alexander Kolei. The mobilization of the prisoners, what do they get in exchange for that, in exchange for parole, and how are you going to explain it after Wagner to the world? Why do we mobilize the prisoners? Well, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, we do not mobilize the prisoners. They were provided with the right to enter into contracts with the armed forces until the end of the special period. So it's the goodwill of the prisoners themselves. There's a large number of prisoners who are currently serving their sentences, and many of them expressed a desire to defend their homeland. And talking about the military service, there are no peculiarities about that, apart from the fact that they will undergo their service in the specialist units that will be no different from others. They will be paid on par with other servicemen. They will be entitled to the same vacations, and the only nuance in the legislation is they will not be entitled to regular rest and recuperation, but only due to family circumstances. Well, I would like to thank our speakers. We were discussing the topical issues of operation of the armed forces. Unfortunately, we have no time for more questions. We've discussed the reforms, the battle operations, and Ukraine Media Center Confirm will continue its operation at 13:30. We will talk about the enemy shelling of Kherson region and current situation over there. Thanks, everybody. Stay tuned.